Pixar is known for producing some of the best family films of all time. Their movies are filled with adventure, big laughs, and heartbreak. But sometimes Pixar takes things a little too far, and when you really stop to think about what's going on, you realize that some moments are really dark and twisted. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our notification squad so you never miss a video from Screen Rant ever again. And before we get started with today's list, can you guess the feature film based on these emojis? We'll let you know the answer at the end of this video.
Recon Plan Charlie, execute! Let's move!
Toy Story. 1995's Toy Story was the first feature film ever produced by Pixar. It was also the first full-length film to be made entirely in computer-generated animation. Coupled with the fact that it's a truly heartwarming story, Toy Story has deservedly earned its place amongst the family-friendly film Hall of Fame. But Pixar can never resist throwing in a few oddly dark moments into their films. We all remember the creepy scene in which Buzz and Woody are captured by the devilish boy next door, Sid. His monstrous toy creations are truly a creepy sight to behold, made all the more dark by the realization that these toys had to hold still and pretend to be inanimate as they were ruthlessly torn apart by the limbs and glued back together. But it's not just Sid's torturous ways that make this storyline kinda messed up. To get back at Sid, the toys stage a nightmarish plot in which they crawl toward him like zombies emerging from the earth. Now, Sid may be a bully, but he's still just a child at heart. Imagine the psychological issues Sid must have developed after seeing his toys come to life. No one would believe him, and he'd likely need years of therapy to get over such a traumatic event. The Good Dinosaur. The Good Dinosaur might just be Pixar's most forgettable film. I mean, it only came out in 2015 and we had totally forgotten about it until we started combing through Pixar's catalog in order to make this video. The film went through development hell since director Peter Sohn began working on it in 2009, eventually uprooting the story and changing most of the voice cast. The result was a rare miss for the studio, and The Good Dinosaur became Pixar's lowest grossing film to date. However, to put that into perspective, the film still made $332 million against a budget of $175 million. So it's not so bad. But one thing that was so bad was the really dark death scene of Arlo's dad. He's trying to teach Arlo a lesson about conquering his fears by running with him in a storm. But when Arlo trips and collapses near a flooding river, his dad has to quickly push him out of the way. But there's no time for him to save himself, and poor young Arlo has to watch his dad die. So much for teaching your kid a lesson. This teachable moment quickly turned into a life-changing one, and not for the better.
No! Harry, no! Don't look at the light!
I can't help it. It's so beautiful.
A Bug's Life. Directed by John Lasseter, A Bug's Life was released back in 1998 and features the story of an ant who teams up with a motley crew of bugs to defend his colony.
Ta-da!
Pixar's version of the story, based on Aesop's fable, The Ant and the Grasshopper, is not to be confused with the DreamWorks animation film, Ants, that was actually released the very same year. The two studios were involved in a very public argument over the films, but in the end, they sort of both won, because both Ants and A Bug's Life were box office successes, more than doubling each studio's original investment. So what's so dark about a cute movie featuring a bunch of misfit bugs? Well, mostly not much, but one scene in particular stands out as going a little further than it had to. Hopper, the evil villain, voiced perfectly by Kevin Spacey,
Well, princess.
has a pretty savage death scene. As he's strangling our hero, a bird shows up and spots the tiny grasshopper. Without much ceremony, the bird coldly starts pecking at Hopper very violently. He literally gets pecked to death. Sure, he's the bad guy, but this death scene is seriously dark, even as an adult.
On three, 1, 2.
Monsters, Inc. 2001's Monsters, Inc. is one of Pixar's best feature films. It follows Sully and Mike, two monsters who make their living by scaring young children. When one of those children finds their way into the Monsters, Inc. factory, it's up to Sully and Mike to bring her home. Monsters, Inc. was not just a great story, but also a great technological achievement. The animation team developed new technology to render fur more realistically for the film. Sully was particularly difficult with over 2.3 million individual hairs animated on his body. It took computers 11 to 12 hours just to render a single frame of Sully's animation, but Pixar still wove its trademark darkness into the movie. In one scene, the evil Randall kidnaps Boo and straps her into a scream-sucking machine. Like, seriously. Let's just think about this scene for a second. He has kidnapped a defenseless toddler and he is now torturing her by strapping her into a machine designed to literally suck the screams out of her body. If he succeeded, Boo would have been helplessly trapped in this torture device reminiscent of a Saw movie and made to do nothing but scream and scream for hours on end. Ugh.
So let's do this thing!
Ratatouille. Co-written and directed by Brad Bird, Ratatouille is the 8th feature film produced by Pixar. Named after the famous French dish, Ratatouille tells the story of a young garbage boy in a Parisian kitchen who befriends a rat that can cook stunning fancy meals. By hiding under Linguini's hat, Remy the rat controls him like a marionette as he cooks his way to culinary fame. The film was a critical and commercial success, walking away with an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. But in one scene, Pixar got pretty dark when Remy's dad is trying to teach the young rat a lesson about getting too close to humans. He brings him to a shop window, and as lightning strikes, a grotesque display of dead rats is illuminated behind the glass. While his dad is really just trying to keep his son safe, his method of teaching him this lesson is pretty gruesome. Not only are there dozens of dead rats in the window, but they're hung up with their heads ruthlessly squashed inside various rat traps. It's hard to watch even as an adult, and it may make you think twice the next time you're laying out some rat traps in your own apartment.
Fish are friends, not food.
Except stinking dolphins.
Dolphins, yeah!
Finding Nemo. 2003's Finding Nemo is a beloved modern classic. The film stars the likes of Albert Brooks, Ellen DeGeneres, and Willem Dafoe. Brooks voices the anxious Marlin, a clownfish who sets out on a journey through the sea to find his lost son Nemo. He's joined by everyone's favorite forgetful blue tang, Dory, who would later get her own successful sequel film. Finding Nemo was the highest-grossing animated film at the time and the second highest-grossing film of the year. It even won the Academy Award for Best Animated Picture, an award that Pixar is no stranger to winning. But this film also earns the prestigious title of having literally killed off 400 babies within the first few minutes of the movie. In this scene, the happy Marlin and Coral are playing around while Coral spots a vicious barracuda hanging out around her eggs. She kicks into protective mom mode, ignoring Marlin's pleas, and attacks the barracuda, which results in her death along with most of the helpless eggs. Marlin is knocked out, and when he comes to, he discovers that pretty much his entire family has been eaten. What a way to kick off a kids movie, huh?
My master made me this collar. He is a good and smart master, and he made me this collar so that I may talk. Squirrel!
Up. We all remember the opening footage from the 2009 instant classic, Up. The film tells the story of Carl Fredricksen, an elderly man who makes his house fly by tying balloons to the roof. He accidentally brings along Russell, a young wilderness explorer who's just looking to get a badge for helping the elderly. Together, they fulfill their goals and learn a lot from each other along the way. It's truly a heartbreaking and beautiful story. Speaking of heartbreak, Up leads in with plenty of it right from the start. In the opening montage, we fall in love with the beautiful story of Carl and Ellie. It starts off uplifting, but very suddenly takes a turn where Ellie has a miscarriage. This short scene expertly shows how such a traumatic event can have long-lasting consequences on a relationship, but Pixar couldn't leave it at that. Later in the sequence, Ellie dies and we are heartbroken to see Carl mourning her. Carl's love for his late wife becomes his motivation for the rest of the movie, and Up does a great job of quickly getting us on the character's side. But in order to do that, they had to really throw a lot of dark moments at us and in quick, sudden succession.
Losing your...
The Incredibles. Brad Bird is known for his incredible animated films, and The Incredibles is one of his best. Released in 2004, The Incredibles revolves around a seemingly typical suburban family who must come out of hiding and use their superpowers to defeat the evil villain Syndrome. As per usual, The Incredibles was another huge success for Pixar, grossing $633 million, winning 2 Academy Awards, and even becoming the first animated film to take home the very prestigious Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. In one scene, Helen is begging Syndrome to call off his missiles, and she tells him that her children are on the plane. This is already a pretty heartbreaking moment, but to make it even darker, Bob is listening to the whole exchange and he thinks that his children have all been killed. Just imagine being a father and having to come to terms with that. It's some seriously heavy stuff. Way too heavy for what's supposed to be a fun movie about a family of goofy superheroes. Fans of The Incredibles will be delighted to know that the film is finally getting a sequel. After over a decade, The Incredibles 2 will finally hit theaters in June 15th, 2018.
Pan away! Pan away!
Inside Out. Featuring a killer cast that includes Amy Poehler, Mindy Kaling, and Diane Lane, 2015's Inside Out tells the story of a young girl who moves to a new city with her parents and is having a difficult time coping with her new situation. Meanwhile, inside her head, personified versions of her emotions are also having trouble making the best of the big move. Inside Out was praised for its compelling concept, great performances, and well-executed story. One of the most lovable characters in the film is Riley's imaginary friend, Bing Bong. He's happy-go-lucky and seems to care about nothing else but Riley's happiness. So it made it all the more depressing and dark when Bing Bong died. Death is a really difficult subject to touch on in a kid's movie, and Pixar doesn't shy away from it. As we've seen in a number of examples on this list, Pixar isn't afraid to portray all the heartbreak of death in their films. But somehow, the death of this silly imaginary elephant was arguably the worst. As Bing Bong embraces death and fades away, he asks,
Take her to the moon for me. Okay?
We'd be lying if we said we didn't fully bawl our eyes out at this scene.
Ready?
Ready.
Toy Story 3. This is absolutely the darkest moment in Pixar history, and it comes from the 2010 film Toy Story 3. This third installment of the popular franchise was predictably a huge hit for Pixar. The film raked in over $1 billion in the box office. Yes, that's a billion with a B, and has received nearly universal critical acclaim for its great screenplay by Michael Arndt, vocal performances from the likes of Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, and Joan Cusack, and a perfect score by Randy Newman. But do you remember how messed up this moment was? At one point in the film, all of the toys find themselves stuck in a burning furnace. As they desperately try to crawl their way out of the garbage, they realize that they're hopelessly stuck as they inch closer and closer to the molten hot flame. This is already pretty scary for kids, but to make matters worse, the scene gets very dark when the toys accept their fate, hold onto each other's hands, and embrace the inevitability of their demise. Watching Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head tearfully hold each other has got to be one of the most upsetting moments in Pixar history. Well, that's all we have time for today. Which messed up Pixar moment do you think is the darkest? Are there any scenes from your childhood faves that ended up being way more twisted than you thought? Let us know in the comments section below. And before we forget, here's the answer to today's emoji trivia. Well, did you get it right? Comment below with your answer and don't forget to subscribe to Screen Rant so you can stay up to date with all of our uploads. And if you're looking to binge, check out our playlist for endless viewing. Thanks for watching.